well, to talk about that and reflect on Benjamin Zephaniah's life and work is the playwright and author Bonnie Greer. Bonnie.
Thank you.
We were just talking in the break. Benjamin Zephaniah had such an influence on you in the 80s when you were living in New York that it saw you come over to the UK.
He was, you know, I'm not an expert on his poetry. I can't give you a long thing about his writing at all. I can just talk about what he was. We did a performance together once. You know, I'm sitting there like, oh my God, it's been... But, you know, he was part of a huge generation of Black British artists in the 80s, Caribbean roots, strong Caribbean roots, and he was able to sort of meld those into an identity. He was an anarchist, and that's a rare thing to be because he was someone who believed in the primacy of the individual against the establishment, which was incredible. He was also, I think, a person who was righteous in what he was. He turned down his OBE. I took my OBE. And when he said he turned it down, he said, you know, I don't believe in empires. Why should I take a medal that says empire? And that kind of sets the bar. And it's a big esoteric question for all of us who have empire medals. It's real. And we can all have our individual stories of why we have our MBEs, our OBEs, our KBEs, but Zephaniah constantly challenged everyone to look at who they are. He even cared about other species, animals. He was a vegan. So he was consistent in everything he was because he essentially was an anarchist. He did not believe in institutions as rulers. He did not accept the primacy of people over people. And he lived that way. He lived that way.
What I loved was the fact that, you know, when his first book came out, he couldn't read or write. And he said, you know, look, I'm not making poetry to put it in a book. I'm performing poetry for people like me. He said when he started writing poetry, he didn't know it was poetry. And, you know, because of his background, he had quite tough upbringing, you know, was in trouble as a young boy, you know, all of that. And he just made poetry accessible. I saw somebody commenting on social media before saying, you know, back in the 80s and 90s, when there was a Rastafarian with long dreadlocks being spoken to on TV with respect and, you know, talking about poetry, that made a big difference.
It must have. It must have for people growing up here, for people who have roots in their community and at home. But he wasn't like everybody else. See, that's the beauty of what he was. His poetry came not from the spoken word even, or the written word. It came from his being. And the poetry pushed him to stand up. And in a sense, you can't critique what he did because it was in many ways out of the tradition of what poetry is, out of the tradition of what literature is. He was very, very brave. And
he took on so many different subjects, didn't he? Social injustice, education, immigration, racism,
it was
politics.
about human beings.
Yeah.
And he cared about human beings, and he cared about his people. And he was always there.
OK. Well, Bonnie, thank you so much for coming
Thank you
to
for
talk
asking
about
me to talk about
Benjamin Zephaniah, just revisiting some of his work today. You know, if you didn't have troublemakers, most women wouldn't have the right to vote. A black person wouldn't be talking to a white person. I'd probably be back in slavery. We need troublemakers to challenge the establishment. I think that sums him up perfectly.
Good trouble, as they say in the United States, and that's what he was.
Yeah, disruptors. We need those. Bonnie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sergey.